Now let's take a look at a way to create our own custom styles. And we can do this using Style Builder. This ships with SketchUp Pro and it is a separate program. So let's go ahead and open it by double clicking on it. And this brings us into the Style Builder program. You'll notice it has a three-paneled interface, one for strokes and settings in two tabs, a sets panel, and a preview panel. Now, this preview panel is basically just a viewport, and it allows you to see your style. So this has all of the attributes of a standard SketchUp viewport. So we can orbit, pan, zoom, and so on. Now, Style Builder is mostly a stroke management system. So it manages how the lines go onto your objects in SketchUp. Typically in SketchUp, your colors are determined by the materials that you place on the object, and Style Builder really configures what strokes SketchUp uses to create the lines. And so by default, we have a number of sample strokes here, and these can be combined into sets. So in this case, we have a number of sets. I'm going to go ahead and expand this a little bit. We have 32 pixel long lines. We have 64, 128, 256, and 512. And this is determined up here. This tells us how many of these we have. If I want, I can add or subtract these just by hitting this X here. If I want to add them, I can go ahead and select any one of these and add them back in. Now we can also apply variations to the number of strokes, and this is done here. So I can have as many as 10 different variations of strokes or as little as one. I'm going to select two to keep it pretty simple. And then we can also change the width of the stroke. So if you have a very thick line, such as a crayon or a marker, you might want a thicker line. If you have a thin line, such as a pen or a very fine pencil, you could use a thinner line. I'm going to keep this at 16. So if we look at this viewport, you'll see it's kind of gray and fuzzy, and it doesn't really look like much. Well, as soon as we start adding strokes into our sets, you'll see a bit of a change here. So all I have to do is left click and drag a stroke into a set. And when I do, notice how they pop up. So I can drag another one in here. And this gives me all of my short lines, so my 32 pixel lines. If we want, we can do the same for 64. And again, we can mix and match different types of lines, lines with different character. Or we can keep the lines fairly similar. So if you wanted very straight lines, you could just have one each. Or if you want lines that have a lot of variation, again, you can do that. So basically, all I'm doing here is just clicking and dragging these lines into their respective spots. Now, once I have them in there, you can see how this is actually giving me a way to view how these will look in my style. Now, if I want, I can go over into my settings panel here. I can give the style a name, and I can also change some attributes about this. I can change my dropout length, and as you expand that, you'll see fewer and fewer lines, so it kind of reduces detail. We can also add a fade factor, in other words, how the lines fade with distance. We can also create a halo effect, and you can see when I turn that on, again, it subtracts a few lines. We can also add extensions, in other words, overdrawing the lines here, and you can see how those extensions work. We can certainly bring those down to a lower number, or we can bring them up to a very high number. Now, if we want, we can also turn on or off profiles, and we can also add what's called depth queuing. Now, what depth queuing is it will make the line bigger when it's closer to the camera. So if I turn off depth queuing, notice how the fence gets a little bit thicker. And when I turn it on, it tends to fade a little bit more. So those are some of the basics about how to use the Style Builder interface. Now, we've basically just been working with the standard sample strokes, but you can also create other types of strokes as well, and we'll get to that in the next lesson.